Welcome to Money on Tap. Money on Tap, your personal finance headquarters, where we bring out the professionals' experience and some fun in what we call three-dimensional investing, utilizing insurance, brokerage, and fee-based planning. That's what we do on this show. We look at all sides of the issues, and we bring a fully independent planning perspective to the table.
Welcome to Money on Tap. I'm Ben Brayshaw, joined here with Dan Michelon, and Seth Cressman's on vacation this week, which will be a real pleasure for us. I think that's making the week already better, right, Dan?
That's right. Maybe we'll get some airtime this week.
Yeah, exactly. If you'd like to reach us, you can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. This week we have kind of a unique outline, something a little different this week.
Yeah, this is something that's been on our mind for a little while. We had the good fortune to take a trip this spring down to South Carolina to attend a conference on intentional grandparenting, where we were called to specifically present around the idea of legacy and the financial legacy. But having been down there and taking it all in, we learned an awful lot, and we found some really interesting people.
Yeah, I would say that sometimes God puts things in your life where you get a little smack in the face and you're like, wow, I hadn't looked at it that way, but I'm totally in agreement with that, and I think there's value to that. And I've been, you and I have mulled over this for quite a while, actually, in lots of conversations, and it's been interesting for us. But leaving a legacy in a biblical sense has a lot of different facets to it that leave people like us when we do financial planning and we help people build a legacy. We've talked about estate planning on the show 1,000 times over in different facets of whether it's charitable giving or just providing for your grandkids or any number of those different questions people have. And honestly, this conference really helped build an opportunity to understand a little bit more of bringing intentionality to it in a way that people who are looking for a real biblical core to it could do better.
Yeah, I mean, we're trained in this segment of the industry, and our focus has been, we're trying to work in and out of the tax code, right? But what this conference I think brought to light is that there are people who go about this with the intentions to try and obey a different code.
Yeah.
Their intentions are kind of on a different level. It's not about saving $1 here or there or creating certain types of efficiencies. It's significantly more value driven than that.
Yeah. And while we're at this conference, this poor guy got to meet me, and his name is Dr. Josh Mulvihill. I had a really great time. Josh and I were able to spend an evening and some time around the conference together, and I really got to get to know him a little bit for where his heart is and some of the stuff that he does. He works with renewanation.org. For people who may or may not know Josh, he's actually fairly well known. He's got a number of books, but Josh Mulvihill is the executive director of Church and Family Ministries at Renew a Nation, and he's which helps children develop a biblical worldview. He served as a pastor for nearly 20 years, has a PhD in family ministry from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and serves on the board of Awana, which is really nice, another organization I really appreciate. He has either authored or edited over 10 books, and one of them includes Biblical Grandparenting, and his latest is 50 Things Every Child Needs to Know Before Leaving Home. And that's there's the door. And he's married to Jen. He has 5 children, lives in Minnesota. And he runs a blog called gospelshapedfamily.com. And I'd just like to take a minute and welcome Josh. Thank you, Josh, for joining us today.
Yes, hello, and hello to everybody else.
Josh, so tell us a little bit about yourself before we just jump right in here.
Well, let's see. You gave a really nice intro there, just kind of on my ministry side. On the personal side, Jen and I live on a family farm, and so we try to grow as much of our own food as possible. I'm an outdoorsman and love hunting and fishing, and do that with my boys and my dad. And we chase muskies all over Minnesota lakes. They say it takes about 10,000 casts to catch one, and they don't lie. Just enjoy family and friends and a good bonfire and a cup of coffee, and grateful to be used by the Lord to help families raise their children and grandchildren to know and love Jesus Christ. That's kind of my passion, is family discipleship.
Yeah, I definitely, I no question walked away from that conference with Christian Grandparenting Network, CGN, down in South Carolina, having that, nudge of passion that you had for sure. We have people walk through our door every day, and it's no fault to their own, and I think it's a cultural thing, and I want to get into this, but the phases of phrases of retirement. People say, "Oh, well, I want to spend my last dime the day I die. I'm just going to run out of money." Dan, I mean, how many times have you heard that?
Oh, absolutely. You get the vision of that car like sputting and making all kinds of noises. It rolls right to the finish line and then just
right at the emergency room.
Yeah, that's right. The wheels fall off, the doors come off, and that's the end of it. So that's the vision a lot of people have for retirement. But the reality is it doesn't go that way, right? You don't spend your last dime on your last day. And I think that, there's some things that were uncovered at the conference that we're going to get into. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag too soon here, but about how the perspective of that is, certainly not rooted in the Bible for sure, and is really something that's kind of developed culturally here for quite some time, and we're not really sure why.
Yeah, and I think one of the things culturally, and I'd like to just pass this over to Josh a little bit, is the concept of snowbirds, and what that looks like in our society, the cultural framework and how that fits in biblically. I think that was the first kind of point that I thought was made that brought us into the concept of where legacy ends up.
Well, I'll answer that in sharing a little about my family. So my grandparents, I live in Minnesota, and my grandparents, one side of them were snowbirds. And so for about 5 months of the year, they'd travel down to Arizona just after the holidays were over, and then they'd come back after Minnesota thawed out, usually about May. So we, as a family, we didn't really see my grandparents for at least half the year, despite the fact that we live, about 100 miles from them, so less than 2 hours away. And so their presence in my life as a grandchild was limited, and I would even say was fairly minimal. Yeah, I didn't really think anything of that as a young person. Just kind of that was what they did, and that's the way it was. But as I got older and started understanding what the Bible had to say more about God's expectation for those in old age, and specifically for grandparents, it started to dawn on me that, wow, that kind of life choice is hard to align with what I see God asking of grandparents in the Bible. And not that it's impossible, but essentially my grandparents were trading, they were trading comfort and warmth and friendship over some of the responsibility with family, and not that they're mutually exclusive, but in this instance, it did prevent one from happening as far as what they could do in engagement with us as grandkids. And so, and I see this now amplified at a much greater scale. My grandparents went to Arizona, but you can find retirement homes and retirement communities in warm climates all over the United States, from Arizona to Texas to Florida. I spoke this past winter. A retirement community in Florida asked me to come in and do a grandparent conference. And, I said, you got to know what you're signing up for here. And they asked me to preach at their church on Sunday. There was about 600 in attendance, and there was not a single child. There was not a person under maybe the age of 60 in this congregation. It was a very eerie, weird kind of thing. And we've kind of gotten used to this idea that age segregation, that's normal and good and okay. And what I do with my retirement years, we've we've really disassociated that with any kind of biblical expectations that God has for the generations. And, and I don't want to get legalistic in how I'm speaking about some of these life choices, but we do want to allow the principles of Scripture really to inform these kind of life decisions that we make. And for many grandparents, that hasn't happened. And so maybe this is if you're listening to this, it's just an opportunity to evaluate in light of the Bible some of the choices that are being made.
Yeah, I can only imagine that speaking at a retirement community is probably. Yeah, in reality, the idea of biblical grandparenting and speaking in a retirement community, success there would be bankrupting them, unfortunately, right? I mean, sending everyone home to their families. So I think that's kind of ironic. But, we've chatted a little bit about this. You and I had some very direct conversation about the idea that, a lot of people that come to the United States, especially first generation families that come to the United States, they live in this multi-generational living situation, which is pretty much a norm in most countries. Like your grandparents are there with you the whole part of the time, and yet we have, created these massive communities. I think about the villages in Florida. I don't know how many, was it like 100,000 people or some crazy number? Maybe it's way more than that. I have no idea. It's a massive place. But what to me I find is really strange is that a lot of these places, your grandkids can only visit you for like a week or two. Like it has to be a very short stint. And even these over 50 or 60 communities that they have over there have, very huge limitations around the time period your kids can be with you. And it's this cultural segregation piece when you think about it that way, it's just, I don't know why for me it's like, oh, wow. I guess it's just because we've been hearing about snowbirding for, Dan, you were talking about your grandparents. You share a little bit there.
Yeah, no, kind of similar situation, but we were even kind of closer in. I mean, both sets of my grandparents and my family, my parents. I mean, we were all in the same town, literally in the same town for my entire youth, and all my grandparents were devout Catholics. I mean, very religious and very much practicing. But I never thought anything different of this. But my father's mother, my father's father had passed. My father's mother, being a widow, but just very, very ingrained in the family day to day. I mean, we were literally there every day after school. Like she would never have thought of leaving to Florida to winter or anything. Even she had the means to do it, but it wasn't even ever a conversation. And my mother's parents, they were together, obviously both alive still, and they would take that trip down to Florida and do the snowbird thing every year rather. And just over time, I mean, we were present for all the holidays and all kind of the major occasions. We were always there together. But in looking back on it, I mean, just the effect that they all had on my lives. They're all loving and generous people. My father's mother is still spoken of in the house. I mean, literally daily. And she passed away in 2005. Where
so 20 years later,
yeah. And for the other side, I mean, my kids, they're 6 and 8 years old. They've become close to meeting her, but they know her. They know her name, right? And they've met my other grandparents. They were able to spend a couple of years together, knowing them, but they just don't come up as much. So that lasting effect, although wasn't necessarily an intentional, to my knowledge, biblical perspective, but there's just no denying the long-term effect on a true legacy and the passing of values that took place simply because she was present all the time.
Yeah. I think that brings us to the question, Josh, that I have for you is how would you define, the biblical grandparenting definition? What does that look like for our listeners? When
I answer a question like that, I want to ask, what's God's designed role for grandparents? And that gets us at, what I've termed as biblical grandparenting. And so when I try to summarize something as big and multifaceted as grandparenting, that was actually quite painful. So I'll give you the answer and then I'll kind of give the explanation. But I define it with a single word: disciple making. That's the role of grandparents scripturally, to pass on a heritage, a legacy of faith in Christ to future generations. And what informs that, if you look in the Bible for guidance on, what does the Bible say about grandparenting, if you try to look up those words, grandparenting, you're not going to see them in the pages of the Bible often, depending on the translations, just a couple times. But the Bible uses terms like son's son and children's children and father's father hundreds of times. And so that starts to give us a very clear picture about what God has asked of grandparents. And I'll just give you one, maybe the most concise passage on grandparenting in the entire Bible is Deuteronomy 4:9, which begins with a call to watch your own heart, your own life carefully. I'm paraphrasing. And then the second half of that passage says, teach these things to your children and your children's children. And that was, of course, in reference to the law, the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy 5. And so here we have God telling grandparents to teach to grandchildren, and so that's one. So as we talk about grandparents are disciple making, that's a facet of that. And there are many, many passages like this which start to help us understand this is really what the purpose is of grandparenting is scripturally, and then of course our life priorities, snowbird, where we live, how we spend our money, retirement kind of things, all of that begins to then find its place in relation to the larger whole. If this is what God's asking us, and how do we arrange these kinds of decisions to help us accomplish these kind of big picture purposes?
Putting those two together and just thinking about what you're saying, Dan, and Josh, what you're sharing. I mean, thinking about teaching your children's children and, being that grandparent and so forth, I think about the societal impact that we're having, and the problems we're having among young people and just, complete disarray. And I don't think this is I would honestly tell you that I wouldn't even say specifically that I feel that it's a Christian or non-Christian thing. I really think that just the fact that, grandparents are not pouring in to their children's children by these snowbird conversations, that we're having an impact, across our nation. And I think it's not just Christian kids or Christian grandkids or Christian parents or grandparents. I think about myself. I've got one daughter that's 22, all the way down to 12. And what I know today as a parent versus what I knew 10 years ago is radically different. And I handle things differently. I see things both relevant and irrelevant now more so than when I was first a parent, first child, right? Everything's running to the hospital. You're afraid of this, you're afraid of that. But then by the time you have your fourth kid or fifth kid, right? And I'm the youngest of five. I hope they make it, And so there's a part of that that's, But if my parents, don't pass on to me and don't pass on to my children, and my parents have passed away, but my in-laws are basically my parents, but passing generationally on, and they are involved in my kids' lives. But if they weren't, what knowledge have they learned from what my age is to what their age is? Do they see things so much differently than I do today? Right. And I just wonder, Josh, I think that was the big shocker for me was how little of the knowledge of that kind of gray-haired, retired adult who sees life from a perspective of the glimpse, they see it from the 30,000-foot view, right? We're still at 10 or 5,000 feet up, but they see it from such a different angle, that the importance of that, not to be able to share that with anybody, including your children or your grandkids, at the level of the intimacy that you were talking about, Dan, just having your grandmother around.
I mean, in my experience, all my grandparents, again, my father's father passed when I was very, very young. So the three that I grew up with, they're all survivors of the Depression. They all went through kind of the same times and economic hardships. So, the lessons and values we had around money were kind of the same across the board. The strict adherence to the Catholic way of life was the same across the board. So you think that value set would have transferred the same way, right? Because from the 30,000-foot look, they believed and thought the same things, but they certainly delivered their messages different ways. My father's mother wasn't one to mince words and would kind of let you hear it, loud and clear at any given opportunity. But it truly just comes down to her being present. It was the presence. It was the reinforcement. It was the constant message. So she's been one of the loudest and clearest influences in my life and in my growing up. And I can see myself, going to go back to your point of, do you have this exposure to the gray-haired wisdom, or I'm phrasing it not the way you did, but, I still see that coming out in the way I raise my kids.
Yeah.
And my parents are still around, but they are doing the snowbird thing at this point. It took a couple of years off for the whole COVID experience, but this year they were back to Florida. And, I see myself conveying more of her wisdom than they probably do because they're not around as much.
Yeah.
So I think the message is carrying forward, but probably in a way that in some other families that have that same dynamic, it's probably getting lost.
Yeah. You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. We have a special guest, Dr. Josh Mulvihill, today, speaking about leaving a legacy in the biblical sense. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about the financial piece of this here shortly. But don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Are you looking for personalized guidance to kickstart your investing journey? Look no further. Brayshaw Financial Group and our planners are here to help. Our team of experts will provide personalized advice tailored to your financial goals. Visit BrayshawFinancial.com today to schedule your free consultation. Brayshaw Financial, investing made easy.
We appreciate you listening to Money on Tap with Ben, Seth, and Dan. You can contact us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. And now, more of this week's program.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. I'm Ben Brayshaw, joined here with Dan Michelon. For our listeners, Seth is on vacation this week, and he look forward to having him back next week. And Dan, you'll be on vacation next week.
That's right.
One day, maybe I'll get a vacation around here. But we have a special guest. Dr. Josh Mulvihill is joining us today, and we're talking about intentional grandparenting and leaving a legacy in the biblical sense. Because we talk so much about legacy here in estate planning, and I'm excited about this in so many ways because I think our listeners really will get a lot of value out of this. But Dan, you wanted to bring something up.
Yeah, I've witnessed firsthand. Hasn't happened to me myself just yet, thankfully. But I've seen the excitement when somebody's about to become a grandparent for the first time, right? And the action steps quickly become, well, who's going to buy the stroller? What kind of crib are we going to get? They're offering their help to the parents to be, all right, about kind of more traditional in a kind of Americana sense, like, okay, what does the baby need? How can I be of the most help? But that really isn't touching on any of the things that we're kind of discussing here today, right? And the name of the conference that we all met at and spent those great couple of days at was Intentional Grandparenting. So my question for you, Josh, is, how do you intentionally set on this course to make sure that you are leaving behind and imparting and teaching the things that truly matter? And it's not about the strollers and the wall color and all that. How do you take those first steps to chart yourself onto this course of real intention?
One of the challenges that Christian grandparents face in today's society is that there are some really powerful messages about how to grandparent and what a person is to do. And those perspectives really are centered around spoiling grandchildren, having a lot of fun with them, as well as not being a burden or overstepping the family boundaries. And what that ends up doing is it really limits the kind of deep, lasting, meaningful relationship we all want as families, extended families, and as Christians, the passing on our values and our views to our family, and it actually prevents that from happening when we adopt the mindset of culture. And so part of intentional grandparenting, intentional Christian grandparenting is recognizing that those views just are not in alignment with what we see in Scripture, and really having clarity from the Bible about what God asks of us and expects of us as grandparents for our interactions on a regular basis. And then if we know God wants us to pass on our faith, and that's a key element of our grandparenting, then that becomes something that we can just weave into those opportunities we have, whether mini or small, whether close by or long distance, whether we're out fishing, which, I like doing that, whether we're in a boat with our family, grandchildren, whether we're cooking in the kitchen, whether we're in the car, we move from grandparenting to intentional Christian grandparenting. And it brings purpose to each of those times we're together, where we begin to say, okay, I'm going to think proactively about weaving some truths of God's word into a conversation, or it's not just about fun and games. So we can still have fun together, but let's be intentional with this so that there's some greater purpose there. So that's kind of what we're getting at with intentional grandparenting.
I think that's, you can be an intentional grandparent or try to be an intentional grandparent for, a few months a year and snowbird it and so forth. But I think, living your life out in front of your grandkids, like your grandmother was, like living your life out and seeing value and intentional natures in all of that, just even being there that much shows how much you love and care for. I mean, like there's just so much passed on just by the presence of being there on a regular basis. It's like snow or no snow. Like at the end of the day, who's going to be standing there, on your final day by the side of your bed because you cared that much about them, and then leaving that legacy of somebody who you'd be proud to say is my grandchild. I made that as part of my life goal, something I want to pass on. I think there's so much that's missed in our society in so many ways. And, Josh, you've written a number of books, and if I'm a listener today and I really want to be a better grandparent, which book would you've written a number of them, and I mean, there's family and marriage, I mean, you've talked about it, but can you just share a little bit about some of your recommendations there of where to start?
My personal favorite is called Biblical Grandparenting. It's a super deep dive into essentially a biblical theology of grandparenting, and then it looks at about 50 years of research. It's heavily footnoted, so it's meaty. So if you are a deep thinker and you like to really really be pushed in what you're reading, that'll do that. If you want the quick, casual, no footnotes, easy read, there's a different book called Grandparenting. That's kind of more the layman's version.
We'll get that one for Dan. We'll get that one for Dan.
Yeah, both are very good.
Like a Cliff Notes on the casual one.
So if you want to get one of these books, go to renewanation.org. That's RENEWANATION.org. You can also find them on Amazon, but the Renew a Nation nonprofit is a wonderful organization, and when you purchase there directly, you're really supporting them in general, and I would really encourage you, renewanation.org. Christian biblical grandparenting is something that is just not getting the attention. But I'll tell you, Josh, I was truly shocked when I went to that CGN conference down in South Carolina. I mean, people from England and California and all the way north in Maine and down to Florida. I mean, you just name it. I mean, basically worldwide almost, of people that really do have a calling in their heart of hearts that the Holy Spirit is just driving them to really, focus on becoming the best they can be. And I think that's one of the things I love is when people are really striving. I mean, you don't have to be the best, just the best you can be. And I think that's one piece that, either you're stepping to the plate or you're not. But Biblical Grandparenting by Dr. Josh Mulvihill is something I would encourage you guys to all get. One of the things, Josh, we talked about in Proverbs 13:22, something you had referenced, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And boy, that's a pretty clear directive if I have ever heard of one. And would you like to share a little bit about your perspective on that?
So I think the key question with that is, what does the word inheritance mean in that passage? It's really clear God expects us as family to leave an inheritance, in this case to grandchildren. Of course, children are, I believe, there as well, scripturally. But some of us don't even think about grandkids in general as part of our inheritance perspective. And so part of my research on Christian grandparenting was asking Christian grandparents, how do you understand what your role is to be in inheritance with your family? And I got 4 responses that I think are pretty representative of how most people handle their financial inheritance plans moving forward. And I'll summarize those for you. It's spend now on family, spend now on self, provide a spiritual inheritance. So we're spiritualizing what Proverbs 13:22 says. There's no money involved. It's faith-based kinds of opportunities. Or number 4 is save for family, so that they'll get something after I die, pass away. And so that kind of is representative of how Christian grandparents think about inheritance. But I think probably the most prominent in our culture is the second one I mentioned, which is spend now on self. We often think, I've worked hard. I've spent years and years of my life. It's my time now to relax, to travel, to play. I've earned this, and therefore, our focus is ourselves. Maybe you've seen. I don't know if you've seen the bumper sticker that says, "I'm spending my child's inheritance." I've seen that on cars here or there, but I think sometimes that is our perspective. Is if there's anything left, our grandkids can have it, but it's not a driving priority in our life, and so it's kind of a me-focused approach in that regard. And we can chat more about those 4 if you guys want. I will say, though, summarizing that, what does the Bible mean by inheritance? I kind of think it could mean 3 different things, and I leave this door open. The Bible talks about giving a good name, to passing on a good name to our children and grandchildren. That's literally worth more than precious stones and valuable things at the time, any money that's present. Like if we trash our name with really bad life choices, and we pass on, essentially we don't have a good reputation. That's costly rather than of value. I'll give an example with my own family. We all live in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis area. My dad and mom have passed on a very good name, and so they were also in full-time ministry, 37 years with Campus Crusade. And regularly, not only in Minnesota, but across the country, people will come up and say, "Hey, is your dad Joe Mulvihill, or your mom Jane Mulvihill?" And that is. And they'll tell me some story of how God used them to impact their life. Or this just happened to me about a month ago. I had somebody at a conference I was speaking at said, "We had your family's picture He goes, I called you the refrigerator kid. We had your family's picture on our refrigerator, and we pray for you. We still are in contact once in a while with your dad, and they passed on a good name. I've been in ministry now my whole life, and that's been a benefit, a blessing to me, rather than the opposite. The second one, scripturally, the inheritance, the most critical one is salvation, and then that third is financial. And so I think all of those are legitimate ones, but I think I think there's two applications of this. One, if we don't have any money, we don't need to fret because God has given us such a level of importance spiritually to pass on that is of great value. And two, we shouldn't use that as an excuse to say, well, I'm passing on a good name, or my kids are following Jesus, so therefore I can do whatever I want financially. That wouldn't be right either. So I think there is a level of expectation scripturally that there is a financial commitment that the older generations have to the younger, and that is to be passed on in some capacity. And this is where Ben and Daniel and the crew here, I think, become really helpful to everyone listening to make a wise choice as good stewards of God's, of God's money, of how we do that best within our unique family situation.
Yeah, well, that's definitely what we try to do. I think, a lot of people. One of the things that we spoke about at the conference was, charitable giving, and supporting a number of charities, and how to do that in a tax incentive manner through various types of charitable trusts and, tax planning and so forth. Because a lot of people, giving is a core item to everybody, right? To give of your first, right? And that's the focus biblically. So, looking to do that and to do that well, I think is also part of giving. You had said something about, I was just thinking about, so some of our listeners probably, maybe don't have a financial legacy to leave. Like they've lived their life. It's been, paycheck to paycheck. Maybe they're listening here today and they don't have that financial gift to give, or maybe something they may not feel is significant enough that will be even meaningful. And I think you made a really good point about inheritance and the fact that it can be as much spiritual as it is financial. But as you were talking about that, Josh, I was thinking about, I have worked with people who have come into my office and we've chatted about, they focused on wanting to leave a legacy. And they literally, were not saving for retirement. They were literally buying life insurance to leave their children so that they could have a better life than they had. And I was floored by that. They wanted to they didn't care. They're like, yeah, I'll make it. I'll figure it out. But I want to make sure that when I pass away, because my kids, I don't want them to struggle. I want them to have another leg up. And that's been a very interesting kind of conversation, because people do have that calling, from a financial standpoint. Just something that popped into my head right now as you were talking, because people do make that intentional piece. I would like to dive into those 4 points you made. You talked about spend now on family, spend now on self, provide for a spiritual inheritance, and save for family. I would really like to talk about, kind of the first and the last point, spend now on family or save for family. Do you have a perspective on when one's right or more relevant than the other? Do you have any opinions on that?
If we're thinking about intentional grandparenting, I think the question I would ask is, how can you put your money to work to make the greatest impact for the spiritual health and growth of your children and grandchildren? And so that may look different for for each family. I think giving some examples of what I mean by that. For a spend now on family perspective, I think you could invest in Christian education, K through 12 education or Christian college, knowing that how impactful education is, and as Christians, seeing what's happening in public education in our country and saying, parents maybe of children saying, "Man, I can't afford Christian education, but we would love a different alternative." And grandparents could say, "This is part of our inheritance, is that we're going to spend now on family because we know that this education piece is going to be very impactful in the faith development of this child, and it's gonna pay great dividends." Versus maybe decade or decades down the road, those children those early years are so formative with shaping of faith. Maybe they get it in their 30s or 40s instead, and they're kind of at a different place in life, and those views and values that they have are set, and that money is used in a different way and is felt differently, and so it magnifies the impact spiritually, maybe early on in that area. Save for family, a legitimate reason for that might be in the current age and stage of family. There just is some wisdom in waiting due to maturity level, age of family, where we don't want to putting money into the hands of somebody at this point, or for whatever reason, is not a wise thing to do, and it may end up causing problems for them because there's just not a level of self-control, or it would be used in a way that as grandparents, as individuals, we would see that as a negative. And so we put some stipulations around it. We put a time limit on it, or a timing on it, and in hopes then that maybe that Save for Family becomes a motivation or a help for individuals to get to a certain point to receive that. And I do think sometimes that is a legitimate piece to help individuals move as a motivator to a certain place in life. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Since this is the world you guys live in, what you recommend to others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're just joining us, we have Dr. Josh Mulvihill with us today with Renew a Nation. We're talking about leaving a legacy in a biblical sense and kind of going through those pieces. And yeah, Josh, I'd love to share a little bit about that, because we do so much work inside the trust world in building, healthy legacies. And we talk to people. I actually had a meeting with a client the other day who has no children, but she has a large amount of wealth, and wanted to make sure that she had left the money to her siblings' spouses, providing for them and helping them, and then her nieces and nephews. And we went through this whole process of creating, some really strategic wealth planning, but creating income. Like, matter of fact, we created income only for well over a decade from her wealth, and then distributing the money accordingly as time went on. And, I think it really comes down to understanding the people you're giving the money to. If somebody is a spendthrift and is going to blow through the money, and it's really not going to have meaning, and it's not going to be used in a healthy manner, it's almost better just to give it to a charity at that point, because, nobody needs a brand new Lamborghini concept, and that's the biggest fear. What do you think, Dan?
Well, I think part of that ties back into, kind of the overall intentional grandparenting and how, how do we determine what exactly comprises an inheritance? I think to the point here that we're kind of focusing in on, giving the financial inheritance, if for whatever reason the values have not transmitted, the belief that this person's capable of being a good steward with those financial assets, I think that's where, this decision gets a little complex, and perhaps some sequence of timing is involved here, because if the values didn't sync, well, then handing that person a large check that's likely to be spent in frivolous or potentially harmful ways.
Any number of values you don't possess.
Right. So, maybe they're just not mature enough. Maybe it's not the right time.
Well, I always looked at it like this, and I've always told people with, like, hey, I really want to leave some money to my grandkids in college and so forth. And I've always said, like, you could have a sit-down conversation about, what your grandchild wants to study and why and how you want to invest in that. Like, what a great perspective to be able to sit down and have a conversation. I mean, that's the investment right there. Like, the money is almost meaningless, but if they have real, like, what are your hearts and dreams? What's driving you to want to be a mechanical engineer, or you want to become an electrician or a firefighter, whatever it is? All the schooling costs money. It makes no difference. So if you can sit down and find out what God purposed in their heart and what that calling is, because every person is so uniquely different that, getting to the core of what you're investing in, and to your point, Dan, the values of that is really great. And I think you can cover a lot of this type of things. If you should predecease the opportunity to have that conversation, it doesn't mean that you can't, help mitigate that in one way or another. I've seen people write. I have one client who gave me letters to give to all of her children when she dies.
It reminds me of my grandfather, who did do the kind of the snowbird routine later in life, but his kind of claim to fame in the family was he was this great Irish storyteller, right? So, if you found yourself kind of caught up with him in the middle of some kind of a chore, or you're working out back, or whatever the case was, you could be sure there was going to be a conversation. They were very much in-depth kind of conversations, and he was, way ahead of his times as far as, being health conscious and all this. There is so much wisdom that was imparted, and faith was a big part of that. Even though he didn't have the physical presence as often as my grandmother did, but he was the type that wanted to know what I wanted in life, and he would give me guidance around those kinds of things. And he was not shy about letting me know when he disagreed, or he'd probably hear certain things from my mother that would trigger a conversation along the way of a corrective nature, but. So his investment in us and me and my sister was kind of at a different level, but it was that storytelling, it was the sharing of experiences, and it was a truly earnest desire on his part to know what we wanted in life. So those are meaningful times.
That's great. You're listening to Money on Tap. We're going to be right back. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. If you'd like information about renewination.org, happy to reach out to them. Dr. Josh Mulvihill will be right back with us, and we'll take a quick break.
Hey everyone, Dan Mickelon here with Brayshaw Financial. Looking for a hassle-free way to invest? Look no further than Brayshaw Financial Group. With Brayshaw Financial Group, you can start investing with as little as $100. Enjoy a user-friendly platform with a diverse range of investment options. Visit Brayshaw Financial Group and start your investment journey today. Brayshaw Financial Group, investing made easy.
You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. And now, more Money on Tap with Ben and Dan.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. I'm Ben Brayshaw here with Dan Mickelon. If you're just joining us, we're here with Dr. Josh Mulvihill, and we are talking about leaving a legacy in the biblical sense today. And, as we wrap up our show, there's just so much to this conversation. There's a lot of emotion around this conversation because there's people that are probably listening today that are feeling like, have I done this right? Because I'm a grandparent now, and how do I make an impact moving forward? Or you're going to become a grandparent. Those are questions that you have, and I'm looking forward to having more of that conversation and how to do that well. Josh, for our listeners, whether you're going to become a grandparent, which one day I probably will be. I'm so young that I'm not yet. And then there's people who are becoming grandparents right now or are in probably later stages of being a grandparent that are listening today. What would you give as advice as how to move forward from here and on any stage or level?
You want to remember two phrases actually. That's one phrase is grandparenting matters, that just recognize your presence and your influence makes a considerable difference in the life of grandchildren. And I think sometimes our world tells you otherwise and minimizes that. And so just a recognition that there's a significant influence that can be had, and to be willing to engage with family to have a significant influence is something that's sadly is kind of unique in many families today. The second phrase would be moving from Christian grandparenting to intentional Christian grandparenting. And of course, there could be a million ways that that's applied, that we become intentional, but it really is allowing our Christian views and values to really shape our interactions and our priorities and passions, interactions with families and priorities and passions at this stage of life. And one of those is financially, how we use our money in this last season of life, and how we distribute that after we're not here. But also just how, what we say and how we spend our time and all of the interactions that we have, that for us, what does it look like if we're becoming more intentional and want to matter greatly for our family? How can we, what does that look like in our life? Maybe we're going to increase the presence we have, and maybe it means we become more intentional talking about some of our faith, how God has worked in our life, tell our faith story when we're with our grandchildren, or communicate some of the truths, wisdom that God has shaped in our life that we pass on, and open up the Bible, and or we're praying for our great. It could be intentionality, could be any of those things that we're just not doing on a consistent basis. That we're saying, okay, I'm gonna commit in this area to be more purposeful and to live this out on a consistent basis because God's given me this role. It's an important role. It matters, and I want to be faithful to what God says in His Word.
Well, there you have it, Dr. Josh Mulvihill. That was great. Our charge today, if you're listening, passing on, value sometimes is your values is more important than your value in your wealth and your worth. It's who you are and who you're going to shape that next generation. I think, if you don't have, the book Biblical Grandparenting by Josh Mulvihill, you should be stepping up and buying that right now. Honestly, I really do feel that's a missing piece. You can get that at renewanation.org. That's renewanation.org. You can also find it on Amazon, but in support of the ministry, please try to go there and purchase the book in support. But Dan, do you have any last thoughts?
I really kind of this whole conversation has honestly left me feeling pretty blessed to have had some of the experiences I had with my grandparents, and how lucky I am to have had those things and those influences in my life, even though they kind of approached it from different perspectives. I do get the sense that there was intentionality there, whether they went through this practice or not. The desire to impart upon us and to make sure that values persisted and stuck with me and my sister was clear and present every day.
Yeah, I think that's, who knows who you'd be, Dan? Who knows? The world is a safer place for your grandparents. But, if you don't have an intentional legacy plan, if you haven't really sat down with somebody and figured out, hey, this is how I'm going to make the greatest impact on my family and my grandchildren, give us a call, 855-226-8551, or you can email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. But our real charge is that whether it's us or somebody else, that you take some real intentional focus on making sure that your legacy really is the very best it can be. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to talking to you guys next week. All success in your investing.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of this radio station and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. No strategy, product, material, or tool mentioned can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information, products, materials, or tools mentioned should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. This show may be subsidized in whole or in part by a product sponsor or issuer. Securities and advisory services offered through SagePoint Financial Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC, and a registered investment advisor. All other services offered through Brayshaw Financial Group LLC are independent of SagePoint Financial. SagePoint Financial and Brayshaw Financial Group do not provide tax or legal advice. Main office is located at 116 South River Road, Bedford, New Hampshire, 03110, and can be reached at toll-free 855-226-8551.
Well, bye.